Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I'm your host, Kimberly Cloud. I have a very special guest here for the show today. Can you go ahead and announce to the world who you are and where you're calling from?
Yeah, thank you, Kimberly. My name is Amy Pease, and I am with the founder of Passion from Pain. And I am in Oregon, Silverton, Oregon.
Okay. And can you tell me about your past leading up into your present? Extensive
Absolutely.
past?
Absolutely. So I was adopted from a neglectful mother as an infant, right into a narcissistic, manipulative, mentally abusive adopted family. So I had it pretty rough growing up and in my early life. And, it was veiled in a kind of a blanket of care for me, so it was really hard to detect and notice in the beginning, especially as a child. You just don't know any different. I was always raised that I would always need these people in my life. I would never be a functioning human or adult without them. And but on the other end, that I was put to work at the age of 11, full time, doing working under the table, washing dishes and whatnot, doing gardening, whatever an 11-year-old could do to help put food on the table for adults who, able-bodied enough to work but just didn't want to. I supported these people until I was about 25 years old, even as a single mother having a child of my own that I needed to support and care for myself. Ended up having him diagnosed with autism, and through all of that and the stress and whatnot, and just not having a normal childhood and adolescence, I developed some severe depression and anxiety from all of that. And went through all of the mental health programs, therapy, medications, psychologists and whatnot, in an effort to learn how to be happy, or take a pill to be happy in what was essentially a pretty crappy situation. And it wasn't until I had a chance encounter with a urgent care doctor. One day I had had a panic attack after receiving a phone call that my car was about to be repossessed and the lights were off, and I had no idea how I was going to fix this. So after having the panic attack, I went to urgent care to get some medication to calm me down so I could figure out my next move. And that doctor looked at my history, looked at everything I had been diagnosed with, undiagnosed with, re-diagnosed with, all the medications I'd tried in the past, and he went through, my family history a little bit and asked me what was going on. And I told him, and, that doctor looked right at me, and, changed everything right there and said, Amy, your problem is not a chemical imbalance. It's why none of these medications have worked. They're never going to work, because that's not your problem. Your problem is situational. And when you change your situation, that is when your depression's going to change. The anxiety is going to change. And that hit me, like a ton of bricks. It was crazy. I had never imagined, because, this whole time, these people had told me that, they chose me, that they loved me, they would always be there for me. And, had always had this, I don't know, over concern for me. And I always thought that was love for me. Little did I know that that was a manipulation tactic, to keep me under control, to continue to support them, and do whatever I needed to do for them. And it took me about a year, after getting that news, to you know get the strength and courage to realize that I could leave, that I could do this on my own. Years of being told that I couldn't. That's just hardwired into you, and you have to unlearn that. And it took me about a year to just get the strength to say I am gonna at least try. I was looking at single motherhood with zero help because I had no other extended family, or continuing down the same road that I was down, and I knew where that was leading. And after 3 suicide attempts already, I knew I couldn't try it. I knew I couldn't go down that road anymore. I had to try at least single motherhood. I had to try, at least for my son. And so, I did. I got the resources together, got the help, got an apartment. And from there, it was the best decision that I had ever made, was to leave. And from there, I ended up getting a job just as a dishwasher, just to support myself and my son. And I took every opportunity that I could to learn and grow from there. Um, every promotion that I could. And from there, I worked my way up in corporate restaurants. I ended up starting as a dishwasher, and then a waitress, then a bartender, then a shift supervisor, assistant manager, general manager, district manager, training manager, district training manager. So I took every opportunity. And so, I was paid, I got, essentially, I was paid for the education that I got rather than going to college. And, I'm so grateful that I did it that way, and I learned, all the ropes, the hard way, but, it worked for me. And from there, I was able to start my own businesses, and recently sold all those businesses so that I could retire at the age of 45. So I could do this and I could help other people realize that, it doesn't matter where you start in life. It doesn't matter, who raised you. It doesn't matter, if you are in a bad, manipulative, or abusive relationship. There is always a way out, and there is always hope for the future afterwards. And that is what I'm here to do now. That is what Passion from Pain is all about, discovering our purpose and passion from the pain that we've been through in the past. And that's my new mission now. And writing books and speaking, and have my own podcast as well, where we talk about just overcoming adversity and resilience and abuse and trauma and all of that, and how do we just survive from it, or actually dominate, not just survive, but dominate our lives afterwards. And that's the mission. That's the future.
Well said, Amy. Okay, so tell me a bit about your tricks for those out there that are experiencing abusive relationships. Of how did you survive all of those years? Was it just self-medicated, or was it detaching yourself? What did you do to survive 25 years of this?
Oh Lord. It was, in the end there, it was absolutely my son that was the biggest motivation, because I knew that if I wasn't there, I knew exactly what he was going to grow up in, and I didn't want that for him. The other side of it was, I didn't know any better, and I was just surviving from day to day. I would wake up and I would do the things, and I would go to work, and I would come home, and I would go to bed, and I would just do it all over again. And I just didn't know any different. I didn't know that I was being abused. I didn't know that I was being manipulated, but I knew that life sucked, and that was just, the way that it was for me. And in that whole time, I just thought there was something wrong with me. And in that, I was trying desperately to want to feel happy. You see other people who are happy, you see other people living their lives and, chasing their dreams. And I just always thought that that wasn't for me. I was never going to be able to be that person. And, it was just, I felt that I had a duty to help support these people. My adopted mother had, some disabilities and whatnot, and I felt that I had a duty to help them. And that's really what kind of kept me going throughout everything, was this false sense of duty that I had to them. Even if it meant that I was miserable. But it was a price that I was willing to pay at the time. But that's how messed up they can, these manipulators and narcissists, that they can get you in the head, that you feel like it is your responsibility to care for them, and to, continue on for them.
Well said, during the inhibition, what do you feel you would have done differently had you been aware, and not inhibited, to the way you were raised? What would you have done different? Would you have spoke out and told somebody, went back to the adopted company and told somebody? What would you, Amy, do differently?
If I had known any different back then, I definitely would have left, and I would have started a lot sooner, just living my life for, myself, and doing the things that I wanted to do. I would have chased my dreams a lot sooner, had I had any kind of understanding that I had the ability within myself to do it. I would have just got started a lot sooner on everything. I had dreams of being a speaker. In high school, I was a speaker in high school and did very well in that. And I would have chased those dreams, but I was led to believe that it wasn't for me. So I would have absolutely started a lot sooner. I would have hit the ground running, as a young adult rather than supporting other people.
What does needing versus wanting set in the standard for a narcissistic relationship? And what I'm trying to say is you felt you needed your family, but had you wanted your family, it would have been different. You would have detached and started a lot sooner, like you said. So how does needing versus wanting sets the standard for a narcissistic relationship through your
No,
theory?
yeah, it's everything, I bring this into my relationship with my husband now. And he understands that I don't need him in my life. I want him in my life, and that's the difference. I can take care of myself. I will be just fine without him, but I don't want that because I love him. And that's the difference. It's not feeling like it's a necessity. Like I do want these people in my life. I do want this person in my life. That's the big difference. Not feeling like I need to have them in order to function, to survive.
What would you tell the company that adopted you? Would you tell them that without you going through what you went through, you wouldn't be selling businesses to retire at an early age at 45? Or would you tell them that they need to change things about their company and reevaluate their the partners that come in for adoptive children, a little bit harder, so these children, like you once were, would not grow up into an abusive relationship?
The company themselves, I don't think, I think they were deceived as well, because my adopted mother was actually a foster mother for the state of California for a long time. And so she had a pretty good track record with them. So at the time that I was an infant and going through that situation with my biological mother, she had a good standing with the state. And so I think that, they did everything that they could at the time. And I don't know if there was anything that any red flags that she would have given off at the time. A lot of this came to be after she had made some decisions about relationships in her life and had left my adopted father and had married a different man. And so I believe that, a lot of that came from her being manipulated by a narcissist herself. And so I don't believe that the company itself was necessarily at fault for anything. Now, I do think that, there does need to be stricter guidance in or regulations in vetting, who is getting adopted by who. Absolutely. You hear a lot of stories about children getting adopted into, abusive homes and whatnot. And I do think that that can be avoided, just through, vetting people a little further, looking into them a little more, doing more visits to the homes and whatnot. But there is some things that they could absolutely do. But in my situation, it was a very different situation that, I'm not so sure they really could have prevented, at the time.
Do you feel like, for those who are watching, that if you see something, say something, and that the children should also be evaluated with the people that had set up the adoption or foster care? Because they're not, the children don't get trained to evaluate their parents. Their parents is supposed to be the one to evaluate their children. So what do you think about that?
Oh, that would be a great idea. If the children are taught to, learn how to, speak up against, or not against, but talk about the parents with other people. A lot of times the children are groomed by the parents to say this or that to pass the exam or the inspections, and it needs to go the other way too. These companies need to be able to train the children and say, this is what you need to be looking for. This is the signs of abuse. This is the signs of, narcissistic behavior, and you need to say something if something is not right, and do those evaluations with the children. I think that's a great idea, and pulling them aside and away from the parents, and letting them have a moment to, have their voices heard.
I know you asked your if it wasn't for your doctor, giving you tough love, you probably would still be on a narcotic. You
Yeah.
know, tell me, how did your new self, because it wasn't easy, because I am an ex-drug addict. How
Mhm.
did you enter, like, detach yourself away from drugs? Because even though the doctor didn't prescribe, you can still get drugs from off the street. So how did you come to that conclusion where you were like, no, this isn't for me?
I didn't want to live in that lie anymore. I didn't want to be that person anymore, and that feeling within me was so strong that I just couldn't take myself down that road, to where I was seeking drugs on the streets. Now I knew how to get them. That wasn't
Mhm.
the problem. It's just that I was done with everything I had been through. I was done with the medications, and I wanted to give myself, a clean slate, a clean chance. And that motivation within me was really strong. And it just wasn't an option for me to continue on with the medications. Now we did take me off of them safely.
Good.
So we tapered off of everything so that it wasn't a hard withdrawal off of everything. And I think that helped a lot, because I do think that if I had gone through a hard withdrawal, that it would have been a very different situation.
Do you still talk to your family for strength, or did you detach yourself from your family?
I don't talk with them anymore at all. I see them on social media every once in a while, and good for them and some of the things that they're doing now. I feel like back then I was enabling them to, just continue to be lazy and just be dependent, and now they're doing things, and I'm proud of them. But in order for me to continue on the way that I'm continuing on and to do what I want to do, I need to stay away. I don't want to get wrapped up in that again, because I know where that can lead, and I know how easy it is for them to manipulate me, and I just don't want to go there again. So it's better for me to just stay away and just live my life.
Do you feel like history repeats itself? Do you feel like history repeats itself? Like one day, like you will get in a situation where, before I ask that, do you still see the same doctor that weaned you off?
Not anymore, no. No.
Okay. Do you feel like you still maybe have situations where it can intertwine with drug use and you shut that door? Did you lock that door, and throw away the key? Like, how do you withstand stressful situations?
So it took me 15, almost 20 years of shadow work, reflection, understanding depression, anxiety, manipulation, understanding narcissism, psychology. I studied the subject pretty hardcore so that I had an understanding of everything that I was facing. And that was a huge part of it for me, just needing the understanding. I needed to know why everything had happened. I needed to know how I went from, a 4.0 student to somebody who fell for all of these tricks and whatnot. And so in that studying, I learned all the tricks that I needed to learn for myself. So I know that the depression comes back. I know that the anxiety comes back. It does. Stress happens.
Yes.
Life happens. But
Mhm.
I know myself. I know the signs when the depression is starting to come back. I know when the anxiety is starting to come back. I can see it. And so, with that, I know the tricks for myself to pull myself out. So when I feel the depression is starting to come on, I know that there is something in my life that is not sitting right with me. And I need to figure out what that is. And I need to change that. And same with the anxiety. There is something that I'm fearing, and I need to understand what that fear is, and I need to face it and overcome it. And that's what the depression and anxiety really is. It's something that I need to confront and I need to face, and I understand that. And that's what I do with it rather than just hiding from it and not wanting to look at it. And sometimes this means looking at things in myself that I don't want to, but it's what I got to do to not go down the medication road, not go down the drug use road, or get into alcohol. It's what I have to do in order to maintain the life that I want to have, but that comes with having a strong why, a strong motivation in life. And this is all work you've got to do on yourself. But that's where the Passion from Pain platform really comes in to help is helping people understand that in themselves and get to that point that they don't have to go to these cheap escapes or experiences or turn to medications. And don't get me wrong, these medications do have a certain place for certain individuals, they're for sure, but they're not always the answer.
Well said. So tell me about your podcast, tell
Mhm.
me more and tell me about one instance where a guest had you astonished with their story.
Oh goodness, I've had so many transformational stories on. That's one of my favorite guests to have on is people who've been through something and want to share their experience and their story. One of the stories that really stuck with me was this gal who was raised, in a pretty normal household. She had a father, she had a mother, was raised in the church and just had a rebellious streak in her. And she ended up, pretty much trafficking herself, essentially, just out of just pure rebellion. It's just what she had within her. Now, after years of just abusing herself and finally understanding why she did things that she did, now she's essentially a nun. And so she went the complete opposite way, but it was almost like she had this need within her to experience the darkness in order to understand the light so that she could help other people. And that's kind of the conclusion that she had come to, why she had gone down the road she had gone down, even though she didn't understand it at the time. And so, that's just one example, and I talk with a lot of psychologists and therapists and just, other survivors and people that are just dominating life after, their traumatic experiences. And there's so many tricks and just so much advice that is being shared on the platform. We're in the middle of recording our second season right now, and the guest lineup is just incredible. So it's gonna be great this season. I love it.
Great. And tell me about, take me down the rabbit hole. Well, we're running out of time. So tell me about, where do you see yourself going for the future, retiring?
For retiring, so right now I'm working on getting my book published, Finding Strength After Toxicity. There's a course that's going to go along with it as well. And basically, it's a roadmap to help people through a healing journey. These are all the things that all the marks that you need to hit to go down your healing journey, because it's not a straight and narrow path. It's not a linear path, and it's different for everybody. And that's where everybody gets hung up and where everybody ends up quitting. So that's my biggest goal, is to get that information and that roadmap out for everybody. And I will be doing a lot of speaking on stages, platforms like this, getting the podcast, the audience more out there, more prolific, just getting it out there, getting the message out there. And, my hope is that this message is going to continue on, even after I'm gone. This is a healing that, that just the country needs, the world needs right now. Everybody's hurt, and everybody needs a healing right now. And that's what this is really about. And I just really hope it continues.
One last question before I let you go. If you had to give anyone, like, throughout your experience with your parents, your foster parents, if you had to give experience and you wanted to tell them what not to do and how to overcome challenges with bad foster parents or bad adoptive parents, what would it be?
Definitely open up to other people. That was one thing that I never did. I was always afraid to open up to other people. I was always afraid of the confrontation. I was afraid of the repercussions. But we can't fear, the things that we don't know are going to happen. We need to speak up for ourselves, and we need to find the courage and the strength within ourselves to just talk to other people. That alone right there would have probably changed the situation a lot sooner for me, had I had the strength to just let anyone else know what was going on. But I had this need for everybody to think that my life was perfect, and that's what everybody kind of thought, because I didn't let anybody know any different. And it's okay to let people know that things are not okay, and in fact you need to do that when they're not, because there are people out there who can help and who want to help, who genuinely want to help, but they don't know if you don't tell them. So don't be afraid to say something when something's not right. Speak up.
I think God would want people like you and I to come to heaven because, and the lady that you told me about earlier, because we've been through learning experiences and it's nothing but challenges over and over, yet we find our way around those challenges and help ourselves to understanding better, things with our lives, trying to make a better experience of our lives, you know. How can the people reach you?
Absolutely. So I do have a website. It is passionfrompain.com. And all of my information is on there. I'm also on Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. And YouTube is where the podcast is, Passion from Pain. And I'm also on Spotify and iHeartRadio and iTunes. You can find the podcast on there as well. So yeah.
Okay, stay on the line. Thank you,
Yeah.
everybody, for joining my show today. Y'all take care, be safe, and I will see y'all another time. Bye.
Never waste my time. You are I want.